Hello, everybody. This is Albert, and we are finally back with another book for the Raisinsouls series. So it has been a minute since I got another book, y'all. So bear with me. Yes, the we all saw the election and all that stuff. So I had to just take a pause. And I was reading another book. I was with a book club, and we were reading another book. So I had to realign things in order for me to like really move to do another book and read and do something for this page. So the next book that we're doing today is Imagination, a Manifesto by Ruha Benjamin. And I want to give a shout out to one of my good friends from grad school, Aria, who gave an autographed book to me for my birthday by Ruha Benjamin. This is Aria went to a talk that Ruha Benjamin was in and got an autographed book by her. Let me see if I can show the autograph. So here it is. So I just think that it was just really special. So shout out to Aria. I call her my wife because we are like when we take pictures together, we look like we're married. But she's a really special friend. But yeah, so we're gonna get into a bit of backstory about Ruha Benjamin. She's a professor of African American Studies at Princeton University, and a lot of the topics that she specializes in deals with race, culture, politics, and technology, which that is interesting. So she's talking about race in a technological world and how that's getting playing into the part in like the tech industry and everything of that sort. So let's get back to trying to get into this. We might do two parts for this, depending how good of a job I am to summarize this book in like an hour and 15 minutes or so. So we're gonna start off with the introduction, which pretty much gives the premise into why Ruha Benjamin wanted to do this book. And she started off with talking about this Pelican program that she was in when she was in school, and she's biracial. She's black and Indian, I think, and she's in a predominantly white community in this program. So there wasn't a lot of black kids in this school, but she was one of the top students. And for her to be one of the top students, she's also in this program, which is kind of like the gifted and talented kids. And it made me think about when I was in this magnet program when I was in high school called the Science and Technology program, and we tend to get like special classes for people that are in that program. And it also made me think about the specific honors classes, the advanced placement classes, the dual enrollment classes that kids are in. And you can say that is kind of like de facto segregation because it's like these are the special kids that are going to push our society forward, and the rest of them are the ones that are going to be normal and are going to be falling in line. They're probably the ones that are going to be the workers, and these are going to be our leaders. So once it's like putting that piece together into like how the education system sets black kids and kids of all races and in different categories and sets them up for how capitalism and racism and ableism and eugenics in the eugenics movement came to be, and how it is perpetrated in the education system. And it made me think about No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, school choice, and everything that is done in the education system. And she also went into into understanding why there is a Pelican program and what do you do to qualify for the Pelican program. And she said here, visiting its website, I learned that there are 3 pathways into the Pelican program: aptitude, achievement, and performance. The state of South Carolina and the district declares my evaluation and eligibility standards that the gifted child has academic needs that must be met in a differentiated environment. This begs the question, who thrives in an undifferentiated environment? The mission of gifted education is to maximize the potential of gifted and talented students by providing programs and services that match the unique characteristics and needs of these students. So then, is the mission of standard education to minimize or hold at bay the potential of most students, which I pretty much explained how that is categorizing and segregating kids. And she also says here, a world that relies on social inequality to keep its machinery running can only afford for a handful of people to imagine themselves gifted. Gifted equals destined leaders and bosses, visionaries and innovators who have the time and resources to design the future while the masses are trained to sit still, raise their hands, and take instruction. Doesn't the unbearable hubris and entitlement of many of the society's leaders, whether in industry or politics or even do-gooding professions, stem from us being told all our lives that we are special? Or more precisely, of us being made special and treated by the law and culture as the chosen ones? And she also goes into how respectability politics comes into play with all of this, because there's the idea of the exceptional Negro, which are, for those who know, is the people, pretty much the black people that are tokenized in spaces. Like these are the representative for black people. You are the Negroes that we accept into this space. And she also says here, the fact is, exceptional Negroes have always been a staple of an apartheid-like educational system that separates the gifted from the normal, and both from the naughty or underachieving. Sticks and stones will only break my bones, but words can lift or crush me. For some, the existence of exceptional Negroes suggests that the system is not racist, but doesn't such tokenistic inclusion to which a few individuals are given provisional membership into an otherwise exclusive club maintain the status quo by making it seem more accessible than it really is? Without a handful of black and brown unicorns, and she calls them unicorns, she called like a unicorn status, black and brown unicorns in honors classes and gifted programs, we might see more clearly the broader patterns of exclusion. We might realize that school tracking perpetuates intra-school segregation. And even when schools are racially diverse, even when they are in the suburban promised land, they often remain deeply unequal. Indeed, the flip side of hoarding gifted, honors, and advanced placement classrooms for predominantly white students is the funneling of black students into special education and remedial programs. What education researchers describe as de facto racial segregation. And hence the title is Imagination. Eugenics, educate, and putting them into education, and coincided that with ableism, capitalism, and racism is someone's imagination, which are people that are the colonial in Europe. And she says, Adrienne Marie Brown reminds us, we are in an imagination battle. So, yeah, like we had to think about it. Someone really came up with this project. So, how do we have an imagination that can counter that? And she also explains more about the unicorn status. She says here, unicorn status is a fickle prize that can be revoked as quickly as it is bestowed. Instead of rallying around individual exceptionalism, we need to see the bigger picture and imagine new systems of education that cultivate everyone's creativity and curiosity. And she gave some stories of some black students that were in like these type of programs where they are considered the exceptional and gifted students. And a science project that they were doing, both of them had projects that turned out to be explosive, and they were penalized because of the accidents that were caused by that project. She says here is Kiera Wellmont, and she had a project that involves like a volcano and there was a water explosion, and she ended up getting kicked out of the honors program, kicked out of the, not just the honors program, just the entire school she got kicked out of, and she was forced into an alternative school where they don't even have the type of classes that were offered in the school that she was in. So that was kind of a punishment for her. She doesn't get the chance to imagine herself in a world where she has agency. So being in this alternative school puts her self-esteem to a hello, and is, of course, it's a school that's not really funded well. And there's another student. His name is Ahmed Muhammad, and with a name like that, not only is there anti-blackness, but there's anti-Muslim hatred because you associate Muslims with explosions, of course. And this is after, not too long after the Boston Marathon bombing, and that put everyone in like um, a terrorist image alert. So both of these kids were kicked out of their schools, and next thing you know, they were invited to an astronomy night at the White House by the Obamas because people realized, like, oh, okay, these are just kids. Well, they don't need to do all of that. We don't need to put them through all of this. And Kiara's invitation to the White House, she wasn't even originally going to be invited until there was online backlash because Ahmed was the one that was invited. But of course, Kiara wasn't initially invited because she's a black girl, and you know how society treats black girls specifically. So, and and Ruha Benjamin explained more into why this book is like a set of proposals, and this is her offer in the organizing space, what she says here. She says here, Imagination the Manifesto is a proposal for exercising our mental and social structures from the tyranny of dominant imaginaries. It is a field guide for seeding an imagination grounded in solidarity in which our underlying independence as a species and with the rest of the planet is reflected back at us in our institutions and social relationships. So she's putting the parallel and like how kids always have this innocence and wonderment about the world because they're like starting to like develop visualizations into like how and what fantasies do they have, what is their imagination world. They got an imaginary friend and everything of that sort. But the school system is a good way to say like, okay, let's stop, let's imagining, let's go by the status quo and what it's going, and that shuts down a lot of imaginations. And you can see that by the example of Kiara and Ahmed in this example. So now we're going to go into chapter 1, which is titled Whose Imagination? So we're getting into more about white supremacy and how it creates its imaginations. So she explained here how when her kids, Ruha Benjamin, her kids all, of course, they are boys, and we tend to associate boys with sports. And she says how much she does not want her boys to participate in organized sports because we know how society treats black men, especially black athletes, when it comes to the sports. And she said she was even like kind of giggling when she goes to her boys what was some football games, and she was kind of giggling when they miss a basketball shot, when they get penalties for traveling in the basketball field, the basketball court. And she says, like, even though she does not want her boys to participate or organize sports, she realized how much the stereotype of the black athlete is like still controlling her, because she just knows like the type of things, the type of expectations that come with being a black athlete. And it's a way for white supremacy to have control of you. And she says here, I wanted so badly to protect my sons from being conscripted into this culturally assigned role where their identities would revolve around their ability to run, jump, kick, and catch. And yeah, she says here, the irony is that even when we try to avoid falling into a stereotype like I was, they are controlling us. And she talks about when all the things that were going on with black athletes, and when they tried to have autonomy, like when Colin Kaepernick got on his knee during the national anthem, and the NFL blackballed him, and after that, and when Simone Biles withdrew from the Olympics in 2021 because she was going through the twisties, which affected her emotionally, mentally, and physically, and not her being able to do her best when she does her competitions. Um, People call her so selfish. They were minimizing her mental health. They said she's a weakling, and you have to take into consideration, like, Simone Biles is so good in gymnastics. Like, they adjust the scoring because of her. Like, the type of gymnastics that she does, no one has been able to do before. So they literally adjust the scoring because she's so good. And she said while all of this is happening, like, Trayvon Martin, and I didn't even know, the murder of Trayvon Martin in the trial with George Zimmerman and his acquittal happened like right before an NBA finals. So all the white people that were supportive of George Zimmerman, those same white people were excited for the NBA finals to go on. And Ruha Benjamin says, a deadly hypocrisy as I see it when it comes to how blackness is selectively celebrated and contained within the white imagination. So she also explained this know your place aggression, which is pretty much when athletes, they get through backlash for being outspoken, for having autonomy and agency, but the white people don't want to hear that. They want you to shut up and still play the game, and please, you need to entertain me. It's like a circus. Like, you're my circus animal, if you really want to look into it that way. And let me see, is there anything else that's going on in this chapter? She also explained college athletes, the NCAA industrial complex, and how I didn't even know that NCAA athletes, they don't get paid. They don't get paid. Like, they get the free tuition, the free room and board, and all that stuff, but they don't get compensated for their labor, and they're the ones that are making money for colleges and universities. So, especially since majority of them black, they are definitely not going to try to pay them. But what's to say what happens after they finish? What if they go get an injury or something like that? There's really no protections for them, and if something like that happens. And after that, and okay, this is something that she also talked about, how games are a business. So we think about imagination, we think about playing, and when we think about play, we think about games, and how white supremacy makes games an industry like sports. But she also but she also went into how we got games like Monopoly, which we all know in Monopoly there's only one winner, and it takes hours for a person to when people go to jail and stuff like that. That's literally how America is, literally a Monopoly game. And she said how Monopoly was actually a successor of this game called the Landlord's Game, which is against Monopoly. So this is what I learned. I learned that there's a game called the Landlord's Game, and there's also a recent game that is being published called Coopoly. This was published back in 2011. I didn't know that existed, and I didn't hear about it until I read this book. So that kind of says about how much is like not being supported because it goes into cooperative economics. And of course, capitalism doesn't want to see that existing. And she also went into how white supremacy give the imagination of the doctrine of discovery, manifest destiny, and survival of the thickest, in which the doctrine of discovery is when it pretty much says like Christians can colonize and seize any land they want. It's pretty much the Crusades. And Manifest Destiny is America. White people created America and has the right to take away indigenous land. Like, they are the ones that are saving everybody by finding America. And Survival of the Thickest is pretty much the favorite races, who's the most fit that can conquer everything. And that sparks eugenics. And Benjamin says here, talk about deadly stories of entitlement and domination. These old stories, and because she considers them the old stories, continue to infect our collective imagination, distorting how we see and value different groups, cultures, and worldviews. They even warp our conception of human nature. Selfish, not altruistic. Competitive, not cooperative. Hardwired, not adaptable. They presuppose a fixed genetic or cultural preposition that ignores the plasticity of our brains and the malleability of our social relations. So she talks about how these images is pretty much the propaganda machine that America funnels. So you can see it in our movies, you can see it in our literature, you can see it in our music, depending on who's the mainstream and who's the most in popular culture and everything that is the supports the dominant narrative, because the victors write history. And she also says here, but lest we assume a simplified choice between old stories and new ones, in reality newer stories abound. These far-out tales of utopian futures come packaged in the dazzling white and sterile imaginations of tech titans and billionaire entrepreneurs. Their fantastic fables transport us into visions of artificially enhanced post-humans numbering in the trillions who live rich and happy lives in their virtual habitats. And this is her getting into the tech industry and how it has a mostly white male lens when it comes to what is considered the utopia. And she also says here, drawing on first-hand encounters with AI evangelists turned doomers, Ethiopian-born computer scientist Timnit Gebru points out the hypocrisy. They don't ever want to talk about real issues they might be implicated in, like racism, sexism, or imperialism. They want to talk about grand visions of saving humanity, wanting to feel like a savior and not wanting to feel like a problem. So we see how AI is becoming more of a thing, and we can already see like how it's kind of detrimental and how people feel about themselves and how they see, like, it gives people an imagination and a way to play, but once it gets into, oh, I got an AI girlfriend, I got an AI body, I got an AI art, and it's really taking away from people to actually get into the soul and what do they create and craft. So it's pretty much, she pretty much saying we need to go into long-termism, which we incorporate more of a participatory democracy style in the tech industry that we need to go by. Because she's saying how the tech industry comes up with all these things like sidewalk labs, and that kind of hints at like there's gentrification involved and is detrimental to a lot of indigenous communities and doesn't get indigenous input when it comes to the creation of those technologies. And she also talks about how a lot of these tech heads and I'm thinking about Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, they don't care about their workers. Um, she said how there was a guy that was in Oxford that was on a listserv and having to go to a court hearing about some racist remarks that he said in that he put out there. And Benjamin says, whether you believe him or not, or whether you think it matters that Bostrom did or does not hold these racist judgments, the fact remains those who are shaping the future of humanity, as this institute purports to do, are gathered from a very small sliver of humanity in their views. Racist, utopian, both and are currently occupying the imaginative space to which the rest of us have a right. The problem goes beyond one individual to long-termism itself, which centers wealthy tech innovators, mostly white and male, as those who should survive into the future because they are the best of the human race. And because those who monopolize resources monopolize imaginations. So people really don't get an opportunity to imagine a world that's not the world that they're currently living in. Kids do, but of course, because of how the school system operates, we put a block to that. And she's suggesting here for people here. But even if the threatening nature of this newish imagination doesn't yet feel urgent to you, I at least hope your critical faculties are tingling. Now you can readily tune into the hollow ethical commitments of these so-called visionaries. You can counsel your children and grandchildren so that they will be attentive to the deceitful machinations of those who fancy themselves the self-appointed stewards of humanity. As each new generation expands their imagination, let them also develop a keener ability to detect bull. Each of us can foster the kind of discernment that tells the difference between new stories of collective well-being and false fables deciding our collective fate. So if you already have a good discernment into how America propagandizes people, it's really up to us to really challenge how things are going. We literally see robot police dogs. Who do you think they're going to be targeting more when they come up with those? And she gets into what she calls the radical imagination, and she says here, radical imagination can inspire us to push beyond the constraints of what we think and are told is politically possible. While I am most concerned with how and what we dream collectively, these are lessons that we can learn from how individuals like Robin D.G. Kelley strive to protect their imaginations in the day-to-day work of fashioning their lives within oppressive systems. And she referenced Robert D.G. Kelley and how he explained his mom is the most creative person when it comes to their day-to-day. She figured out so many different ways on how to handle the household, how to prepare the kids' lunches, how to put some fun in the house, how to connect with her kids. And she gave another example. She said she was talking about Richard Williams, Serena and Venus Williams' father, which I recommend anyone to see the King Richard movie because it was so good. It's just amazing how dedicated Venus and Serena's parents are to their stardom and how supportive they are. And I appreciate people that are pushing their kids to do things they didn't think they were ever gonna do, but they said you are going to the U.S. Open. Look at you, you're going to be in the U.S. Open, and next thing you know, both of them were at the U.S. Open. And Richard Williams, he made videotapes of videos of Venus and Serena's and how they do their tennis and how he has to sell them to some competitors. And she said in the movie they said, and one of the sisters of Serena and Venus said that they don't even watch the Cosby Show because they know that doesn't represent their family. So we have to create our own imagination. And Benjamin says, "Why be drawn into someone else's fictional world when you could be living out dreams of your own?" So she also says here, the kind of tenacity it takes to turn a blueprint into reality can look like a ridiculous flight of fancy to someone standing outside someone's dream. And finally, it was not the power of imagination alone, but a confluence of factors, including the Williams family's determination against all odds, the daughter's ability and work, and Richard and Orsine's initial coaching, that ensured theirs was not another dream deferred. So it made me think about the Langston Hughes poem, No Dreams Deferred. So, two, when we work to cultivate a collective vision for transforming the world, we must be careful not to fetishize imagination as someone operating magically set and independently from other powerful ingredients like strategizing and organizing to make our vision a reality. So, I think that is they using the Williams family is a good example because there was an interview that one of the Williams sisters said where the interviewer was asking who would be a privilege for you to play as, and one of the sisters was like, it will be a privilege for someone to just play me. Play like me. I'm the greatest. So it's like, it's I would say there's probably a degree of narcissism when it comes to that, but for them to like manifest things in that way, you can take that spiritually, for real, for real. But I think that was a cool way to like connect everything together in this in the premise. And that's the end of chapter 1. So chapter 2 is titled Imagining Ourselves. And a story that she gave here is, this is another movie y'all need to see. If y'all see Summer of Soul, the documentary about the Harlem Summer Cultural Festival in New York in 1966, it was in the 60s when it happened. But it was also around the time that the moon landing, I didn't even know that this was around the time that the moon landing was happening. So the first man on the moon, where every TV station is going to be talking about that. But what are the black people in Harlem doing? They're going to a festival. They don't care about a moon landing. They're like, we're poor and broke. We don't care about a man in the moon. We are just gonna focus on our community and what's gonna make us happy. And what's that making us happy? Music and food and a festival. So I think that is interesting how you could, yeah, the Harlem Cultural Festival is an imagination because it had like a lot of it was a lot of performers in that festival. There was Nina Simone, there was Stevie Wonder, there was the Fifth Dimension, there was Mahalia Jackson, and yeah, I didn't hear about this festival. Like it was an intergenerational thing going on during those days. So I didn't know about it until the documentary Summer of Soul was on streaming. So I highly recommend anyone to watch that movie. Um, and Benjamin said, in the film's poignant juxtapositions, we witness a clash of imaginations, a governing white imagination captivated by the utopian possibilities of space travel, and a black social imagination demanding attention to the dystopias right under our noses. So this says everything about how the tech industry moves. We want to create these visions and these imaginations and put them into reality. But what about the marginalized groups that do not have, that are possibly going to be excluded from these imaginations? So what about them? Are they included into the activity of these projects, or they're just going to be falling to the wayside? So that says everything, and it made me think about what was going on in Palestine, because who are the types of people that are controlling the narratives and the news and TV and social media? That's another master narrative that is being put out there. And she also talked about how there's this thing called space colonization, and pretty much like how the man putting the man in the moon, and we're not too long ago, Jeff Bezos was going to Mars, I think, or something. Elon Musk was also investing some things into the space industry, and that are we trying to live in Mars or something like that, and who is going to be included in living in Mars? But what's going on is that they are trying to rid away from the problems of climate change and what's going on in the earth, because as everyone's seen, earth is getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and nothing is being done about climate change, for real. And we got to how U.S. imperialism is contributing to the massive pollution that's going on in the world. So it's like, what are these billionaires trying to do when it comes to trying to make a livelihood in space? So the book also talked about how tech fascism is pretty much going around, and she quoted W.E.B. Du Bois's here. Two theories of the future of America clashed and blended just after the Civil War. The one was abolition democracy based on freedom, intelligence, and power for all men. The other was industry for private profit directed by an autocracy determined by any price to amass wealth and power. And the latter was happening. So W.E.B. Du Bois pretty much figured out what the United States is going to be doing after the Civil War. Because we're definitely in a society now where it's like corporations are pretty much saying everything in regards to politics and media and literature and arts and sports and every other industry. And I say that like they were also trying to create some communities in the ocean, and I'm like, what are we doing? Like like the ocean is getting polluted as well. Like you're really trying to avoid all of the problems by creating these feel good projects. So it pretty much talks into how liberalism is affecting the tech industry. And she also talks about how schools are sites for what she calls spirit murder. And she says here, recall education scholar Rudine Sims Bishop's metaphor of books as mirrors and windows. While mirrors allow us to see ourselves, windows allow us to see the worlds of others. The whiteness of the curriculum means that marginalized students cannot see themselves reflected back, or when they do, the image is distorted, negative, or laughable. But those who see themselves everywhere, a kind of structural narcissism, experience an inflated and unimpeachable sense of their own importance and rightness, becoming victims of their own brainwashing. So she's pretty much talking about how the school system, who's in charge of the education laws and the literacy laws and everything that made the school system what it is. We got school choice, we got charter schools, we got all these things that are segregating kids from each other. And she also mentioned the Indian residential schools that were when they were trying to take over indigenous communities, they put them in these schools where they're very abusive. They tried to manipulate them into following the American dream, and if they don't, they kill them, they harass them, they abuse the kids. And that's what was going on when Joe Biden recently released an apology. And I'm like, sir, there's literally a genocide that is being funded by the U.S. government, and you're giving just an apology to Native Americans. And funny enough, there was a protester about Palestine at the event to let them know genocide is still going on. and these Indian residential schools were a part of contributing to the genocide of Native Americans. And she also goes into how I didn't even notice there. Oh, wait. So she says here, imagination then does not just animate sci-fi inspired scientific endeavors or explicitly creative pursuits like Broadway musicals, viral TikTok dances, and Michael Basquiat's paintings. Imagination is also embedded in the more mundane things that govern our lives like money, laws, and grades. Professor of Collective Intelligence, Public Policy, and Social Innovation Jeff Mulligan warns that humanity faces an imaginary crisis, or the deteriorating state of our shared social imagination. Perhaps, though, it is not naturally deteriorating but actively arrested, given the deep social fault lines and deeply inequalities that impact not only our everyday lives but our ability to imagine something different. And she mentioned how there's also a correlation between youth suicides and the school calendar. So a lot of youth suicides happen during the school year, which I didn't even think about that. Is because she says schools are sites for spirit murder. Like kids are, I guess they clock that there's propaganda being fed to them. They trying to reason with everything. And then there's the laws that are going on in the education system that tend to criminalize black kids. And she said, interesting enough, youth suicide went down when COVID-19, when we started getting the lockdown for COVID-19. So that's when all the kids, they can't interact with each other. There was an opportunity for bullying interpersonally and stuff like that. People are just focused in their homes and with their family, and there was more flexibility given to the education system when people had to be in a lockdown, because America is a very reactive city. And she says here we need to have these things called transition imaginaries from the old stories. So you hear survival of the fittest. She's offering that there should be a survival of the friendliest. And yeah, she says here, importantly, transition imaginaries are concerned not only with restructuring the world out there, but with transforming the worlds in here, our identities, our psyches, our spirits. The historical mission of our time, according to Thomas Berry, is to reinvent the human at the species level with critical reflection, with a community of life systems, by means of story and shared dream experience. And yeah, survival of the friendliest, as one of Zura calls it, rescripting the story of human evolution, shining a light on how our development as a species has relied on pro-social actions and decisions for the collective good. Pretty much reminding, like, nobody can save us but ourselves and each other. No one prospered and succeeded on their own. It took help from others, it took investment from community, and it took resources that are being presented to them to make it in the world. And she also says here, what's more, any reinvention of the human must wrestle with the fact that we have not all been welcomed into the category of human. So she's reminding us, like, all of us weren't included in people's imaginations. Systems of extraction and growth in the forms of slavery, colonialism, and capitalism have distorted, degraded, and denied the humanity of so many people. The historical imagination of our time must entail, then, an honest reckoning with the existing stratification of humanity as a starting point for any reinvention. And she said that we must rescind and not simply regret, annul, not simply apologize, abolish, not simply empathize. So that is chapter 2. And let me see. We're going to go into chapter 3. I think I might have to make 2 parts to this. And part 2 is probably just not going to be as long. So chapter 3 is titled Imagining Eugenics. So she used the story of when there was a power blackout in Texas not too long ago, and a lot of people died from the power outages in Texas because there was a very powerful blackout that happened for a good while where people weren't getting adequate water. They weren't giving the lighting and the power to pretty much live in their homes. And also during this time, this is when VR systems were becoming popular. There was more investment in VR systems rather than this community in Texas, which is a majority black community, mind you. Yeah, she said at least 246 people died, and this was during the winter time, so people were frozen to death. There was some carbon monoxide predisposed by that was precipitating from a storm, and other type of weather conditions that are pretty heinous. And here we go. We have a quote about eugenics here. Most people associate eugenics from the Greek for good and birth with a fixed era, that of Nazi Germany, and with egregious medical practices like forced sterilization. We do not usually think of our contemporary society as eugenic, but look closer. From who gets access to scarce resources when hospitals don't have enough supplies for all patients, to who gets warehoused in U.S. jails because they cannot afford bail. Some lives are deemed desirable and others disposable. We can describe eugenics policies and practices in two ways. Negative eugenics seeks to limit the production of those with undesirable traits, whereas positive eugenics encourages the propagation of those with desirable traits. And we know who tends to be deemed desirable and who tends to deem to be undesirable. And there are all these tools that are being used to support eugenics, such as IQ testing, standardized testing, gifted and talented programs. And she pretty much went into the history of like how these quote unquote scientists came up with eugenics, which I'm not going to get into because it's I think I went into some of the story into fearing the black body, but this one specifically talks about these quote unquote science pioneers called Francis Galton and Carl Pearson, and how they use intelligence, like who tends to be intelligent, and they equate intelligence with having a bigger head. So it's kind of silly. No, it's not kind of silly, it's really silly. um yeah, she also talked about how immigration has been used in supporting eugenics. There's this is new to me. I didn't know that there's things called tubal ligations in prisons. I forgot what page I hear about that on. But it's kind of like it's pretty much forced sterilization in women prisons. So it seemed like it's like some sexual assault that's been going on with female prisoners, in which, let me see if I can find out like what do they actually do. But it's kind of a surgery. And my idea is that they are they know like officers and security guards are going to harass female prisoners, and these tubal ligations is a way for them to control women in the prisons and possibly not get them pregnant, so there's no sign of, there won't be evidence of harassment and assaults. So that's my theory into like why such a thing like that exists. And she also went into how creativity is a superpower, and she said like a lot of these there's pretty much a nonprofit prison arts collaboration industrial complex. So it made me think about the non-industrial, not the nonprofit industrial complex. and how that's associated with prisons. And one of those ways is through arts, in which prisoners they do like poetry, they do arts and crafts, they do all these things that try to alleviate the stress from being incarcerated. And also, this is another movie. If y'all seen Daughters on Netflix, it's another documentary about prisoners that are fathers that get to go dance with their daughters, and because they tend to not see their daughters, they're not active in the household, so they don't really get to see their daughters. But this is like an opportunity to connect with their daughters and have a father daughter moment with them. And it's like, part of me is like, wow, this is really heartwarming. I really appreciate, like, it would mean a lot for those daughters to like see their dads outside of their prison clothes and actually be have some degree of normalcy to them. But you have to think about what's considered normal and stuff like that. But it makes me think about like how brutal prisoners get treated, because it's like, dang, they probably have moments where they just had dread of life because of the conditions that they're in the prison. And once they leave their daughters from that dance, they have to go back to those conditions. So it's like, America in the prison system is very inhumane. So it makes me think about when she was talking about these arts programs, is like the prisoners don't really get opportunities like this where they get to be in a room where they can just embrace their creativity. And yeah, she also said you have to look at prison as a eugenic institution. She says here, the prison, after all, is a eugenic institution, snatching up and discarding those society deems human detritus. Children who grow up in the poorest U.S. zip codes have the highest rates of incarceration, and according to the Sentencing Project, black youth are 4 times more likely to be locked up than their white peers. It is not only that formerly incarcerated people are shut out of the labor market, but that jails and prisons warehouse the poor, rounding up those in dispossessed districts and criminalizing those confined to castaway categories like homeless, drug addict, sex worker, and unemployed. Indeed, economists Adam Looney and Nicholas Turner found that almost half of all incarcerated men were unemployed 3 years before their incarceration, and those who did work earned on an average $6,250 a year. And prison thrives on limiting the field of vision of imprisoned people in the non-incarcerated public. So if you want to go to my video about Our Prisons Obsolete, Angela Davis, she argues that prisons are used as a way to deter us from actually solving social ills and actually solving social problems such as housing, employment, labor rights, racism, segregation, the medical industry, and anything where the capitalists have control. And she also says here, even though art is being the central focus here, art becomes disruptive behind bars, not simply by proving the humanity of those held captive, but because it challenges the inhumanity of the system and creates a connection between those inside and outside prison walls. One of the main ways art can disrupt the carceral imagination is by refuting the eugenic classification and fragmentation of people, desirable or deplorable, worthy or disgraced, precious or superfluous. Art can remind us who we are beyond the trappings of privilege or prison. And she also talked about how youth are criminalized through schools and play, in which I said, like, schools, they start out embracing youth imagination, but it depends on which imagination they accept, and those who need to stop imagining and get in line with the white supremacists, the dominant narratives imagination. And she says here, schooling becomes standardized testing without creative expression, arbitrary rules without room to breathe, black excellence without black joy. Black children are adultified by the carceral state and infantilized by the welfare state. Everywhere they turn, they are denied the ability to just be. And she also says here, imagination, we might say, is the invisible circuitry that connects the world out there to our inner worlds. So we cannot just be critical of oppressive systems without also examining how our own private thoughts and desires reflect and reproduce a dominant imagination that values some lives over others. We must, in a sense, continuously deprogram ourselves, challenging the hierarchies that place us above or below, and decode the imaginative justifications that make those social hierarchies seem natural, durable, and deserved. So that's pretty much her solution. And how we do is we had to focus on our own discernment when we are fed messages about what something that serves the dominant narrative or what actually serves us. And she also went into how video gaming enhances the white masculine imagination. And the type of games that she was describing here, it made me think about Grand Theft Auto, because you have to look at it. It's like it gives you the opportunity to kill anybody and anything, and it's an urban environment, and you tend to go after the drug dealers, the prostitutes, the anything that can be coded as what is considered urban, and what is urban tend to be associated with the white masculine narrative. Um, yeah, she says here the entertainment value of eugenics in turn is not paradoxical, but contributes to its durability, expansiveness, and creators' plausible deniability. Desire and disdain often go hand in hand. Drawing upon the work of philosophers Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari, Balut writes, desire is a libidinal infrastructure that fuels capitalist social relations. There is nothing unreal or irrational about desire. Lust and longing are encoded into the zeros and ones of video games, animating the algorithmic architecture that enables identity tourism and escapism in digital worlds. So she's pretty much saying like how video games gives a desire for us. It gives us the desire to be the heroes of our own stories, but you have to be the villain in some cases. So you are the villainous to somebody when you're trying to become the main character. And what she also says here, at the heart of our prevailing eugenics imagination is a deeply individualistic and hyper-competitive desire that nonetheless is born out of our longing for social acceptance. The irony, of course, is that acceptance is predicated on superiority. I am more beautiful, more intelligent, wealthier, and healthier than the rest, and thus worthy of your love and admiration. The question we face now is whether we can imagine a world in which social acceptance does not rest on these kinds of judgments. You belong without having to show proof of your fitness or superiority. That's interesting. And another thing is she has this she showed this image of this thing called the archisuits, in which they're supposed to be like protective gear for when you're ever being harmed or something like that. And she also tied that into bulletproof backpacks. And we know that bulletproof backpacks is pretty much in response to school shootings that have been happening. There was literally a school shooting there news yesterday. There was literally a school shooting in Wisconsin yesterday when this video was published. So Benjamin is saying we're literally not trying to solve the root of the issue. It's pretty much America is a violent society. It's literally has so many weapons to the point we have more weapons than people, and there's so much access to get weapons, and we live in a toxic, imperialistic, patriarchal society where, of course, mass shooters, they tend to be that demographic, and people, we have an imaginary crisis. So people, there's a mental health crisis, but people use the mental health crisis as a scapegoat to just label someone mentally ill instead of just like actually trying to do something about the problem, which is we are a violent society. Like, it's literally like a psychosis going on in the United States because of how propagandized we are, because of imperialism, capitalism, patriarchy, heterosexism, and gendered violence. So that's also something that is purporting the bulletproof backpack imagery. So yeah, let me see. That is the end of chapter 3. So I would say after chapter 4, I'm gonna take a pause and make this a part 1, and then part 2 will be chapter 5 and 6. So chapter 4 is titled Imagining Justice. And she gives a story of when she learns about this VR reality, this VR technology where it allows you to get into Breonna Taylor's history, what are her favorite things, and things of that sort. So those who know about Breonna Taylor, she was a black woman that was murdered by in Louisville, Kentucky, by Kentucky police officers, and she was just asleep, and they killed her. So this VR system is something where it's kind of a tribute to Breonna Taylor. It's called the Breonna Taylor Garden. It pretty much like had her favorite things. I'm trying to remember all that came with it. It's called a garden because Breonna loves flowers. And it has a lot of artwork of her. And this is something that her family really appreciated, because even though Breonna is not with them, this is something that they can definitely remember her by. And I think that is actually kind of cool how we can use, even though VR was something that was prioritized at a time where it didn't need to be, but someone decided to use VR as a way to embrace a space of healing and remembrance and humanity. And for that to be done to Breonna Taylor's family, I'm sure that meant a lot to them. And this is funny. I learned that there's a game called Hair Nah. So you have these avatars that I think is just a hand or something like that. I looked it up a little bit. It was kind of funny to me how there's a hand that you control and try to stop other hands from touching your avatar's hair. And we know how when it comes to some white people, they like to just touch a black woman's hair because they're so fascinated by it or something like that. Like Solange literally got a song called "Don't Touch My Hair," and there's literally a game where people are trying to avoid other people from touching their hair. So I think that's actually kind of funny, and for that to be something that the kids can play, it kind of teaches you self-respect and stuff like that. So not to be fetishized. So I like that there's something like that going on. So she also said, like, even though play is being used to be criminalized, like there's Benjamin says here, despite the numerous forces colluding to deprive children of the right to play, from cutting recess and extracurriculars at school to unsafe neighborhoods and lack of green space, they continue to imagine and innovate abundance, prefiguring a world they want and need. play allows them to create new possibilities out of impossibilities. So, yeah. So that is pretty much it's telling us like how much we can learn from children just by the games they come up with. Like kids are they're in a constant state of play. Like I want to play. It's like they want a game to play. So they can actually in some games you can actually learn from. So actually like you think about games like tic tac toe, you think about hot lava, how do we use those type of things to actually see each other as people and not try to bring each other down. So I think that's how play is pretty much complicated. Is like how do people view the play? So play is political. Is what I'm trying to pretty much say there. But but she also went into like how the tech industry, as I told you, there's this thing called sidewalk labs in which it tries to create this type of utopia, but it doesn't include indigenous preservations. So it tells you like how much indigenous culture is erased when it comes to these imaginations. So there was backlash to this thing called sidewalk labs, and there was some indigenous activists that were protesting it, saying y'all are just some white men that are trying to avoid all of the problems in the world by creating your own utopia, and you're excluding us from that. So the least you could do is just give us some input. And that's the thing. Hopefully, when they give you input, you're not tokenized for that. You're actually being respected as a group. But listen, it's like you see all this getting rid of the DEI programs in the United States, and all this trying to be anti-critical race theory, when critical race theory isn't even being taught in primary schooling. Um, you got to see like who's actually trying to make these social realities. And she also talked about how there's this thing called Google Island, which is pretty much another way of sanitizing social reality, in which there's an island. And what's going on with these islands when it comes to climate change is like, oh, I see what's going on here when it comes to trying to make an island. You're trying to colonize a land that has already been civilized, but because it doesn't have your input, you decide to take over and create a vision. It's interesting how white supremacy in tech is. She also, she also says here, Robin D.G. Kelly, he was talking about the water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi in 2022, and how community members are trying to create an infrastructure investment plan. And there's a slogan called "Let's Dream Together." And it says here, "Let's Dream Together" is the welcome message that greets visitors to the People's Assembly homepage. This focusing on what could be amid the harsh realities of what it echoes Robin D.G. Kelly's entreaty. We must tap the well of our own collective imaginations. What we do, what earlier generations have done. Dream. Without new visions, we don't know what to build, only what to knock down. We not only end up confused, rudderless, and cynical, but we forget that making a revolution is not a series of clever maneuvers and tactics, but a process that can and must transform us. And she went into the example of the People Advocacy Institute, which is part of this on long-term infrastructure investment in Jackson, Mississippi, in which they try to gather as many community members into trying to create the problems instead of relying on the government to do everything. So pretty much self-determination. Like, you know the problems that you're going through. Get the people that are also affected by these problems and see what we can do to actually solve the problem. Um, and Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, I actually had the opportunity to meet people from Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle when I was in grad school for a project, and they do a lot of work when it comes to public policy and legislative advocacy for Baltimore, and it's grounded in activism and debate and actually challenging every narrative that has been pushed on them. So Benjamin also referenced Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle and the work that they do to make sure people in Baltimore have the support they need. And they established a Baltimore Children and Youth Fund, which community members have access to invest in youth leadership development, violence prevention, technical assistance programs, and more. And that is all for that chapter. So yes, I'm gonna put a part. I'm gonna cut this video and make a part 2 for chapter 5 and 6, which isn't gonna be as long. But appreciate you if you stayed up here for long enough for this video. So I'm gonna go ahead and close out and start part 2 as soon as possible. Okay, thank you. Stay tuned.